Hey, everybody. Before we get started, I want to thank my friends at Hatch for producing this episode. You can get unlimited podcast editing and strategy for one flat rate by visiting hatch.fm. All right, let's get into the show. Welcome to Distribution First, the show where we flip content marketing on its head and focus on what happens after you hit publish. Each week, I share playbooks, motivations, stories, and strategies to help you repurpose and distribute your content because you deserve to get the most out of everything you create. Hey friend, have you ever spent hours creating a blog post only to wonder how you can get more out of it? Or have you recorded a series of webinars and let them die a slow and lonely death on your website? Or maybe you finally got that precious time with your CEO or SME and failed to get anything out of that conversation. Well, the secret to increasing your content's reach and getting more out of your content isn't actually creating more stuff. It's learning how to use what you've already made. And so we want to learn how to give all of your content more life across platforms. And that's why in today's episode, we're getting super practical on how to put your distribution plan into action. And we're diving into the execution. So in this episode, I'm going to show you exactly how to turn one blog post into a dozen social media posts, graphics, videos, and more, creating a distribution flywheel that can keep your content working for you long after you hit publish. And by the end of this episode, you will know how to set up a distribution doc to streamline your repurposing, how to break down your long form content into bite-sized pieces for social media, and how to build a content library that fuels your posts for weeks or maybe even months without creating anything new. But before we dive into the steps, let me tell you about the typical content creator's experience, one that I have lived and that I see a lot of other folks live too. Most people spend all of this time creating a blog post. They research it, they outline it, they create everything, only to hit publish, promote it once, and then never think about it again. They move on to the next piece. So, for example, in my own strategy, I used to publish just a blog and then promote them. But once I learned to distribute that content across different platforms like LinkedIn and Twitter and email, I turned that single blog post into an entire distribution flywheel. And it's something that I had started to repeat every single week. I actually had one post that originally had 30 organic views at the end of a month. And if we wouldn't have touched that blog post, it would have stayed at 30 views. 30 people that month would have seen that content by stumbling upon it organically. But because we ended up cutting up that post, sharing it across LinkedIn and email, we actually ended up generating over 10,000 impressions across the platforms just by repurposing and distributing that content effectively. So let me show you exactly how you can do the same thing. Let's start with the foundation. So setting up your distribution document. This might sound simple. It's just organizing your content, but this document is going to save you a ton of time and a ton of effort. It's the first step to turning your blog post into a content machine. And it's something that most content creators completely overlook when they are creating their content. So what the heck is a distribution document anyway? Well, it's really just a very simple way to organize your content and organize your distributed content. You could use a document, you could use a Trello board, you could use any other system you want. But the idea is just being able to create that content ahead of time and have a place where you can store all of the elements, all of the distributed elements of that content that you want to promote. This document will serve as your blueprint that you can then slice and dice your blog post or other content into multiple formats without having to constantly go back to that original piece of content every single time you want to share it. And like I said, you can use Notion, you can use Google Docs or a simple Word file. It really doesn't matter what you choose, but this document you make will make repurposing so much easier. So here's the basic setup. 3 things you want to add before you actually get into repurposing the content. You want to add the title. Again, this is probably going to be something that's shared across multiple team members. So you want to make sure the title's there. You want to make sure to have a link there. So if anybody else wants to reference or you want to go back and create more content later, that link is very easy for you to grab. And then you want to list out the channels that you plan on distributing in this. So in this example, let's say you're creating a blog post, you want to share it on email and you want to share it on LinkedIn. Awesome. We're going to take those two channels, and it's as simple as that, typing in the title, putting the link in, and putting LinkedIn and email in. And now you have your building blocks for what you're going to create. And with that distribution sort of document set up, we can then move on to the different types of posts that I would suggest you create. So I like to start, and again, this is just a starting point, with two types of posts. I like to do a summary post, which is kind of like a preview or a more traditional promo post. And then I like to do heading posts or topic posts. And we'll get into those too. But here's a mistake most people make. They share just a link to the blog and hope people will click, whether it's LinkedIn or email or however you end up promoting that. The main goal when you create that piece of content is to get somebody to click that link. And how I want you to think about this is flipping that on its head and using what Amanda Natividad coined at SparkToro, which is zero-click content. And zero-click content works because you're giving the audience something of value without forcing them to leave the platform they're on. So you can give somebody value without them having to click that link. And this is really how the internet is trending toward and how the algorithms are trending toward. And so we want to be able to do that same thing with our content. If our ultimate goal is to get people to know, like, and trust us by understanding what our messages are and understanding what our points of view are, like we set up in the foundation phase of distribution first, then our goal really isn't to get them to read the blog. It's to get them to consume our messages and consume the content, wherever that may be. And so if we can tweak that content to make it more concise, to make it more actionable, and to share those key insights, it actually is going to help you in the long run because you let your audience know what the blog's about and why it matters to them, but you don't overwhelm them with the details. If they're busy in their feed, if they're busy in their email inbox, you're not forcing them to have to go watch a full video to listen to a giant podcast or even to read a blog post. You're just giving them the essential bits and giving them a taste of what the larger piece is like so they can feel like, oh, they've still provided value to me, even if I never made a click. So here's a quick example. Let's say you have a blog post and it's titled something like 5 productivity hacks for remote workers. If you were to write a summary post, typically a summary post might be something like, hey, just launched a new post on the 5 hacks for remote workers. Make sure you check it out. Here's a link. That's your typical promotion post. Hey, we did this thing. It's new. You should check it out. A summary post, how I would think about a summary post, is actually stealing from the intro of the blog or the intro of the podcast. If you set up your intro correctly, you're going to have lots of good information that touches on the pains, the problems, etc., that your audience has, and then speaks to how the blog or the podcast or the thing that you're going to eventually consume help solve those things. So we just want to steal those. So I might steal from the intro, and then I might even take 2 or 3 of those specific actionable items out of the list of 5, and I might just give them away for free. I'll maybe strip out a little bit of the information, but I'll give 3 of those away. So I'm going to give you 3 tips for free, and then I'm going to tease out the rest in the CTA of the post or the CTA of the email. Hey, that was 3. We actually wrote a blog post that was 5 productivity hacks, and you don't want to miss number 5. It's really going to change how you communicate with your remote team. Oh, now I'm interested. I got 3. It's valuable. I want to go check out the other 2 because I feel like I'm missing something. That is how I would write a full piece of content that is a summary of what you just created. So the next type of post that I like to think about as a baseline for creating a distribution doc is using themes, topics and themes. And really, these can be found if you're doing a blog in the H2s and H3s of your content. If you are doing a podcast, it might be the main sections of your podcast or the main movements of that show. If you're doing a webinar, it might be the main title slides that you have. But you want to find the main topics and themes that you talk about in the content and then speak to those specifically in a way that those become the takeaway. And here's why that's so powerful. Each header in your blog represents a key theme. And that theme can be easily turned into a standalone social media post. So for each H2 or H3 inside a distribution doc, here's how I would do it. I would copy the text under the header I would first put that header in there. And again, these are all just placeholders. And I'm going to find the hook or the core message of that section. And I'm going to rewrite that for social media. So I'm going to take the section header, I'm going to read that section, and then I'm going to find the hook. I'm going to try to find the thing that makes that section interesting. And again, this is making the assumption that the original content that you're repurposing is good. So I'm going to make the assumption that this section that you're repurposing is interesting. And not every section in a blog will be perfect for repurposing, but the more that you do this, the easier it will be to use this process. So we've got our header in there, we've now got our hook in there, and we can start to understand what makes this interesting. So for example, if your H2 in that blog post we talked about is time management strategies for remote workers, you can turn that into a quick LinkedIn post or grab the hook with something like, one of the biggest challenges for remote workers is managing time effectively. Here's one strategy I use to stay on track. Oh, okay, that's interesting. I'm now interested, right? Like you're taking that core thing, time management strategies, and you're going to break that out into a specific post where you're going to then share, here's one strategy I use to stay on track. So you're now taking the blog and you're actually turning it into a personal post on LinkedIn. And you can break that down and actually show how you potentially use that. Again, it's not direct copy and paste. Repurposing is not, I can just steal everything from the blog and post it right on there. No, you have to make it work and you have to understand how to tune and tweak the message to fit that specific thing. But these theme posts, once you figure out how to do this, it becomes so fast. You set up your distribution doc, you have your themes laid out, and now you have the skeletons of your distribution execution starting to put in place. If you have 4 or 5 or 6 H1s or H2s or H3s within that post, you might be able to pretty quickly create between 5 and 10 LinkedIn posts off of that single post, just off of a summary post and the H2s that are in there. I also don't want you to forget about the visuals that are in your blogs. I'm not thinking about you taking the stock photo that went into your blog post and posting that. So that is not what I'm thinking about. But if you do have original images and graphics that can go with the content that you've created, or videos that can go with the content that you've created, absolutely make sure to use those as well as you're pulling out that content, because images, videos, graphics, they're all going to make your content more interesting. And those could be added into LinkedIn, they could be added into email, any of those, they could be added back into different types of content and make what you've created way more interesting than the text alone. So go back through your blog and grab any of those visuals that you have. And again, these could be charts or infographics that you create, and then you can adapt those for social media. All right, now we're about to get into the real magic. This is the part, now that you've built your distribution document, this is where the fun part comes in. So you took one blog, you took one piece of content, you created one distribution document with between 5 and 10 pieces of content for that particular post, and you've got one down. Well, once you've repurposed your blog into several pieces of content, you got the summary posts, you got those snackable bites, you have images. Now you need a way to organize all of that stuff and where it all comes together so you can actually go back and find all these things. And this is where creating a distribution library makes it all happen. And again, you can do this however you want. You can use whatever tools you want. A library might mean something different to you and your company. But if you just wanted a very, very basic way to do this, create a folder inside of Google Drive, add in all your distribution docs into that folder as you create them. And now you have, every time you put a new distribution doc in, you have a library full of bite-sized content, platform native, that you can always go back and reuse. So if you create a distribution doc and then a year from now you want to send a newsletter and you're not quite sure what you want to write, or you're busy, or you can go back to that library, find a newsletter that you already wrote on a given topic, and just repurpose it again. Maybe you make some tweaks, you make some small updates. But that's the power of having a library. So compile all of your posts into a distribution folder, and then you can take each of those posts and you can start to schedule those across the platforms that you chose. Again, in this case, it might be LinkedIn and email. And since we've got our distribution doc library, we can actually start to go into that library, take those pieces of the content that we have there, copy and paste them from the distribution docs over to the particular planning or scheduling platform that you use. If it's email, maybe it's probably your email program. If it's social media, maybe it's something like Buffer, and you can use those to actually schedule your content ahead of time. And the best part is you are now planning ahead. In the execution phase, you are planning for weeks, or sometimes, depending on how far you want to launch some of this content, even months, all based on just one blog post or a few blog posts. So once you create your distribution doc, let's say you have those 5 or 6 that you had in one, it doesn't mean you have to post all 5 or 6 right after each other all together in 1 week. You could drip out every single one of those posts for the next 6 weeks or the next 8 weeks. And now you have 2 months worth of that content getting shared out to your audience every single week for 8 weeks. And then because you're doing this and because you're building the skill, it's not just that one blog post. It's also the other blog post you wrote. It's also the webinar you created. It's also the podcast episode that you have. All of these things, building this flywheel that every time you're just filling in slots at that point. As far as distribution goes, you create the distribution doc, you have your calendar getting built out, and you map those across, and you understand where you're going to fill your gaps. And it's really just about filling gaps with the messages so you can ensure that the right message is getting in on the right channel and you're putting that out in the right format. And that is what distribution first is all about. So just take a second and imagine a few hours of organizing your distribution, a few hours of creating these distribution docs, and ending up with enough content, enough custom posts, enough custom emails to keep your social feeds and inboxes active for weeks. That is the power of a solid distribution strategy. You're repurposing what you already have. You're not constantly thinking about what you need to create next. You have a plan and you just fill in the gaps. You execute and fill in the gaps. And that way you can stay consistent and your audience can consistently get content from you. And you're able to repurpose what you already have in a way that keeps your audience engaged. All right. So this is just the beginning. Once we get execution down, we can start to optimize. We can see, we can dig into the data. We can look at what's working, what's not. So in next week's episode, I'm going to break down exactly how I think about measuring all this stuff. How do we get in? How do we look at what's working, what's not? How do we adjust our strategy? And how do we move forward and be able to really optimize what we're doing to be able to hit the right messages at the right time? I hope this episode was helpful for you, and I cannot wait to get back here next week and chat with you again. So have an awesome week, and I will see you in the next episode. All right, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Distribution First, and thank you for listening all the way through. I appreciate you so much. And I hope you're able to apply what you learned in this episode one way or another into your content strategy as well. Speaking of strategy, we have a lot of things going on this year that are going to help you build your brand, 10x your content, and transform the way you do content marketing. Make sure to subscribe to the show and sign up for my newsletter at justinsimon.co so you don't miss a thing. I look forward to serving you in the next episode as well. And until then, take care, and I'll see you next time.